Now, let me bring in Chris Smith to the discussion. Chris is the Vice President for Civilian and Technology at AT&T Public Sector and FirstNet. You know Ryan Cody very well at the Transportation Department. Let me get just initial thoughts of what you heard him say. It's a great story. It's a huge success story in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, let me first say the leadership within the federal government has just been spectacular in terms of the ability to send nearly 1 million workers home on short notice, just like every other part of our society, right? To go from kind of 0 to 180 with remote work back in the March time frame and not miss a beat. And the critical importance of the whole of government response to the pandemic has just been fantastic. And, you know, Ryan is one of those top leaders within that group of individuals that met the need of the American people, delivered on the mission without missing a beat. So we're proud to have been a part of that success for a good number of the agencies and organizations around the federal government.
The one thing that really stood out to me is as Ryan went through all the things that happened over the last 6-9 months was one comment he made about changing the hearts and minds around the technology and the processes. And I thought that was a really interesting comment because one of the things I've heard from other CIOs similar to Ryan is people who were maybe poo-poo technology or didn't quite really get behind the technology train. They understood it was important, but it's just technology. You know, kind of, Chris, you probably heard this when you're at USDA. Hey, just make my cell phone work, right? All of a sudden they said to CIOs and probably Ryan too, this technology thing is kind of important. Is that a trend that, you know, not just at transportation, but something you're hearing from a lot of your clients?
Yeah, it is. And he was dead on, right? I mean, technology is such an integral part of our lives that we all have a base knowledge of it. But sometimes you know, when you think about the role of the CIO, which is to make all that technology transparent and allow people to focus on the mission, sometimes people want to grab onto it and hug it, and they're either interested or they're disinterested. But there's nothing like a crisis to show the importance of that technology in an enterprise class organization such as Department of Transportation, for instance. Right. I mean, years after, you know, supply chain within the hospitals, or right, the hospitals having to be able to help individuals coming in with COVID, it quickly became a supply chain issue. And if you look at the critical role transportation has ensuring the flow of commerce, right, I think about 60% plus of all freight is carried by trucks. And you think about the critical role the DOT plays in that, making sure that we didn't miss a beat in the nearly $1 trillion of flow of goods back and forth between Mexico and Canada continued. So we'd have things to eat, that we could get that critical PPE out into the hospitals. That's when you don't want to be talking about technology. You just need it to work, right? But it's the CIO's role to ensure that they've done everything leading up to that point. It's a little bit like, what have you done for me today, no matter how good it is every day? When a crisis like this hits, right, you don't want to hear that you can't get the phone call through. Right, you can't get on the bridge to work remotely immediately. And the reality is, right, when you look at how the Department of Transportation responded to this, and again, many cabinet level agencies, mid-size agencies, you know, the list goes on, were in varying states of readiness. They were, you know, some were very prepared, some were kind of in the midland state, and some were not prepared, right? But the reality is that the network and the technology that we have in place within the country, the critical infrastructure, withstood you know, the demands on it. We talked about kind of how many people were working from home. 1 million government individuals. We'll add to that 50 million K through 12 students. Add on top of that 20 million college students in the country who went home. And add to that roughly 140 million tax-paying workers. A large percentage of them went home. So nearly 100 million people, right? We're all taxing the capacity of the networks to communicate. And the good news is we did very, very well. I think within our networks alone, we saw a 22% increase in the springtime. And so take that back down to a Department of Transportation or Veterans Affairs, Health and Human Services, any of these agencies that had to respond to that, they needed to send people home and not miss a beat in terms of the continuity of their operations to ensure that this whole of government response, you know, continued. So that's not the time to be thinking about how do you modernize, right? And so I think in Ryan's comments, he talked a lot about how, you know, he was able to take and start shifting from this set of legacy lights on capabilities, which, you know, become older and more difficult to maintain and manage, don't get you a lot of new capabilities, you know, positioning themselves to take advantage of the newer capabilities around cloud, or if it's in the networking aspect of, the new capabilities within software-defined networking, which we started that journey 4 or 5 years ago. It's mainstream now. You see a variant of that in software-defined wide area networking, the ability to increase capacity in minutes and hours versus where we had to purpose build things, 5, 10 years ago, the ability to take that software-defined capabilities and put them out, quickly increase capacity so that people could connect and do their jobs from wherever they may be.
The thing about the technology piece that I think we should go down that path is the network side. It's an amazing stat you just gave out, 22% increase this spring on the AT&T network alone. I know, talking with, again, Ryan and other CIOs in the government, they did their best to plan for it, and then all of a sudden their VPN licenses and their network capacity and the bandwidth all had to be upgraded just to support that telework. And they couldn't wait 6 months or a year to do it. They had to do it in 6 hours or six days at most. So one thing that Ryan said that let's dig into a little deeper is, he said it accelerated our normal upgrade path for network hardware. We did a lot of ripping and replacing a lot of our hardware to take it out, to get us to the point where we could scale again if we had to. Walk me through what he meant by that. You think rip and replace, and it's sometimes has a negative word to it or negative connotation to it. But in a sense, what he's saying is we made the modernization happen because we had to, the urgency.
Right. Yeah. In the past, along all areas of modernization, whether you look at cloud storage or network, it was a matter of generally throwing hardware at a problem, right? And each piece of hardware had its own proprietary software. And so if you think about how you increase the capacity in compute and storage in networking, is you add more and more capacity through this hardware-based set and proprietary software set of addition, right? And you run into physics, heating, cooling, the ability of the supply chain to provide those devices, which was something that we ran into early across the board in the nation on some gear, not just in the telecommunications arena, but in compute and other areas. The supply chain began to restrict, right, because of everybody shut down around the globe for a limited amount of time. So what has happened in this modernization, right, within the network, cloud, and storage, is that we've taken commodity-based computing and really driven the increase in capacity through software. So you hear software-defined network, software-defined wide area network, which is a variant of that. The ability to much more quickly add capacity. So if you're not ordering a box off a supply line and having to ship it and then rack it and stack it and get everything working, test it all, you're always going to test everything you do. But software, you're adding just software. Right? Generally, you have the capacity within the compute, and the network capacity is available to you. You're basically just going in and kind of command line, right? GUI interface, typing something in, right? Graphical user interface that we're all used to, versus having to have, very specific set of hardware's proprietary software. So that's enabled us globally, right, and nationally, and for the CIOs and these cabinet level agencies, when they're making those decisions to start to piece these things together, whether it's cloud compute or data centers in which they've done private clouds. They've got a ton of capacity there in the compute for the applications and storage. You start lashing those things together. You got to communicate across those, right, whether it's a commercial or a private data center. And then you got to get that to your workers wherever they are. And right, generally it's been in campus-based locations. Now it's in a remote location. You got to add capacity for where perhaps you used to have to engineer it, rack and stack this stuff. And so the dynamic has really changed. And those leaders that are out in front taking advantage of that now have the ability, again, to make the IT transparent to the user. And when the secretary or the a bureau chief or a component chief, a modular chief within an agency says, hey, I need to go do a town hall with 5,000 people on it, right, and have this support to go along with it, you're able to do it very quickly and do it, again, I would say with better performance, even more securely. We haven't touched on security yet. I'm sure we will. You got to secure. One of the interesting things in the pandemic, or anytime you're down kind of or back on your heels, our adversaries and criminals and activists all try to take advantage of that. They don't go home and and stop what they're doing. They just go remote like everybody else did, and they try and, increase the attacks that are out there. So as you're adding this capacity, you got to do it eyes wide open and in a smart way. So all those things are built in, whether it's the software you're developing and an assured software, supply chain, and then, continually monitoring and modernizing, patching, scanning, all the kind of one-on-one things you got to do in security, and then watching that. So, yeah, I mean, this has been a very, what we term, if we did a word cloud out there, unprecedented in COVID, are going to be right in the center of it. Probably election here over the next couple of weeks as we're airing this, but the unprecedented is really what we've seen this year. So again, the agencies that were taking those steps already were best equipped to take advantage of what's out there. The good news is that those weren't, when we had, a number of organizations that didn't have, were not in a position perhaps, or never thought that they would send the bulk of their workforce home. Because of these capabilities, you can kind of go from 0 to 110 from a stop. It's going to take a little longer. So in some cases, we had organizations that it took not just a few hours or a weekend. It might have been a week or two, but that's unheard of. If you went back 5 years ago and said, can I kind of go from a 0 to 100 to send 10, 12, 15,000 people home and not miss not miss a play on the field?
How big of a deal was it that transportation had initially consolidated something effective like 8 disparate networks into one? How big of a deal was that to when the pandemic hit, that they had already done that consolidation and then they could now upgrade just one network versus 8 different ones? Right. I mean, I know it's a big deal, but help me understand why that network consolidation really set the tone for their success.
Yeah, it's huge, right? And we sometimes just throw the legacy term out there, but this is a great example. If you have 8 different things going on out there, right, that means that you've got 8 different platforms, a lot of hardware, a lot of different software, all operating a little differently. When you want to make a change, you got to go do that 8 times. And oh, by the way, as that stuff's getting older, it's hard to find the people to take care of it, to stay smart on those things. It goes out of maintenance. So while we've been talking about a V curve in the economy, right, where we just had this complete drop in the economy, a lot of people out of work, and then it came back up, and we're not out of the woods, but the president talked about, and economists talked about a V curve. In IT, we talk about a bathtub curve, and that is that as new technology comes in, one side of the bathtub is up here, and while there's fewer people on it, and the kinks are kind of being worked out, it costs a little more. And then when everybody takes it and it's mainstream, it drops, right? The edge of the bathtub goes down to the floor of the bathtub. And then for, some number of years, 5, 7, 10 years, however long the technology stays current, you got this, everybody's in there. It's pretty low cost. It's your optimized cost. And then at the end, when everybody starts getting out of it, the curve goes right back up and you got the other lip of the bathtub on the other side. And the reality is, if you got 8 of those things going on, you got 8 of those curves you're dealing with, not on top of the people constraints we talked about, and changing. You're not changing quick. You're not moving together, right? You got weak links in that chain, and so those that have made that journey were very prescient in doing that, right? And solid, just really good leadership to say, hey, we're not going to let 8 different flavors go here, right? We're going to do this together. We're going to do it as best we can with that truly, high performance, high resiliency, because your investments go further. If you go to a managed service, it gets even better because you're building technology refresh in there. Those are the organizations that were very, very well positioned to respond to the pandemic and take care of their workforce the best. Again, people in the middle and that's had to start from 0 were able to get there. That's the good news in this case. But the ones that were ready, and they're ready for the next thing, right? Sometimes we talk about modernization as this one-time journey, right? Where there's a beginning and there's an end. And that's just not the way it is, right? This is a series of journeys that never stops. You could look at it as an evolution, a lifetime. The reality is you got to make those investments. You get to one set of capabilities, and then you need to start changing that and evolving it over time, because new things will come along. You've got to take advantage of those to continue to be best positioned, again, to make IT the thing that's there and always on, very transparent, highly optimized in cost. We've talked about performance and resiliency a few times here, but security, right? I mean, when you're staying fresh on the technology, you're making your attack surface much more limited because the newer technologies are protected better. You're protecting a smaller surface there, and you're always kind of staying in front of your adversaries, if you will.
One piece of this that I want to just to kind of build upon when we talk about making it easier and then dealing with security is Ryan Cody over at the Transportation Department created what he called an application platform. That way he could take the applications that you need for your day-to-day, your business side, and make them more responsive, whether it's for mobile on a cell phone or a laptop, or just make them accessible in any environment. So not just, okay, am I tied to the network, but if I'm going through a VPN or a VDI, or am I just going through the regular public internet, is it again, safety and then also accessibility? Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that was another piece to the interview that really stood out to me.
Yeah, and I would add one thing to that as we kind of discuss this. It's that you're really getting the customer excited and making them really happy. I've been over-rotating probably on the technology and getting it transparent. But what the customer really wants, right, is the ability to put newer and better capabilities into the hands of their teams to, make the best decisions as quickly as possible, to be able to engage citizens, to use the trucking example to make sure that the flow of freight, throughout our country and across our borders is done safely and optimally. That's what you do when you do what Ryan is talking about, right? If you've got a extensible, kind of scalable, reusable platform that allows you to build things very quickly. So again, the modern technologies allow us to, are very different from legacy technology. You're focused on developing new and better capabilities. So the ability to quickly develop an application that meets a demand to serve your mission better is only done quickly and most effectively with the least amount of taxpayer dollars when you have those platforms that are taking advantage of the software-defined networking, the cloud, and the storage, right? You start to put this three-legged stool together, and you're really just developing new and better things for your customer base internally and for the American people. So it's critically important and should not be understated, because that's how the most successful organizations, the most high-performing organizations, are taking advantage of technology today, and will do so out into the future.
Another big trend we keep hearing is that customer first, the customer focus has really increased during the pandemic, and in a good way, in the sense of, okay, how do we get employees, how do we get citizens to react to work with our agency in a better way? If we have to close down the normal in-person, how do we switch to digital and transform that experience much better? It's interesting, Chris, you and I, when we first met years and years ago, we would talk about HSPD 12 and identity management. And right. Finally, I think I finally wrote the story that maybe the pandemic was the killer app that we've been waiting for identity. We're just about out of time before I let you go. Let me just say, from your listening to what Ryan Cody said from the Transportation Department, what is the big lesson, the big takeaway? What can other CIOs learn from Ryan's experience and then maybe apply to their experiences as we move forward deeper into the remote working, the quote unquote, and we all hate this expression, but I'll use it anyways, new normal?
Yeah, I think it's that IT is the strategic enabler, right? I mean, it's always our people, diversity of who we are, our creativity, our ingenuity. I'd add the flexibility of our Constitution. This continues to be the great experiment that continues to go on. But the strength of who we are as a people, but it's IT on top. That is the enabler, right? It's software-driven innovation. When you think about what's happening in artificial intelligence, machine learning, the proliferation of devices under IoT, right? The ability to improve our quality of life, our safety, security, our economy is just extraordinary. So, I think that's what really underpins this entire conversation, is that you've got to continue to focus on that evolution, right? Not the beginning and end of a journey and, hey, I'm modernized, I'm there. How are you going to take advantage of the next big thing? And it really is about taking the virtualization that's going on here, increasing true performance, right? So that employees have exactly what they need. We're going to see this shift to custom tailored workloads over time, right? We've made great inroads in mobility, but I think when you talk about where LTE is going with 5G and ubiquitous communications everywhere, and the change in the interface between us and devices, we're going to start to have highly tailored sets of information for whatever it is that we're doing. If we're a field worker out there, responding in an SSA office or a transportation safety individual out at the site of a crash, God forbid it, having the information to be able to do the job the best that we can and have the best information to change, the outcome to the best that we can possibly have. That's what's happening here, right? That's what modernization and IT as a strategic enabler is all about. And look, let's be honest, nobody expected. We lived through the SARS pandemic. Many of us were sitting in seats similar to Ryan's at the time. We made changes. That just did not take a terrible course like this virus has. And so this points to the critical importance. We would not be at the point we are if it were not for the technology and the people around us responding to this, right? A lot of people want to say how terrible it is. It is terrible, but it could be a lot worse, right? And the reality is that, everybody's doing the best they can. And the whole of government response, I think, has been extraordinary. And it's really technology that's allowed us to operate and communicate at a level that we never have before. And, I think we have to change Maslow's hierarchy. I've said this before, is that, at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, you got to have clothing, food, and shelter. And there's maybe a couple other things in there. Well, you got to have power and your technology these days. If you ever look after a hurricane or some man-made event, the first thing you see is the people are trying to plug in so that they communicate, so that they continue to drive on, right? They're always going to take care of each other in the community, but it's usually more than just the community. There's a lot of other things that need to happen, and this is a great example of where we are coming together. We will get it right. We will be in a better place, and technology is that quiet thing behind it that helps us do it. It's truly the leaders that put it together and allow missions to continue to do well and do their best out there.
It's a great point you bring up at the end there. The underlying need for technology is one of those silver linings in the delivery from agencies, from vendors like AT&T. It's really the silver lining in this pandemic. Chris, I always enjoy our conversations. Unfortunately, we're out of time for today, so let me thank my guest. Chris Smith is the Vice President for Civilian and Technology at AT&T Public Sector and FirstNet. Chris, always a pleasure to talk to you.
Jason, great speaking with you, and thanks to Ryan on the early part of the call.
I'm Jason Miller. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search AT&T.